Welcome to Season 6 of the Casted Podcast, where we are back with more of our very own users as our guests. Why? Because by becoming Casted customers, it's pretty clear how committed they are, not only to podcasting as a key piece of the future of their marketing efforts, but also to the bigger picture of how these shows all fit together into their integrated marketing strategy. They're the most forward-thinking brands that are harnessing the perspectives of experts with podcasts. And then they're wringing out those interviews to be amplified across all other channels. They're practicing what we preach, and I want you to hear all about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how you can do it too. I'm Lindsay Chapkema. I'm CEO and co-founder of Casted, the first and only amplified marketing platform for B2B marketers. And this is our podcast. So, have you ever wanted to start a podcast, but it seemed like there were too many barriers to entry? Probably. But today's guests know exactly how you feel, and they had even laid out ways for you to tackle these challenges head on. I'm chatting with two members of the Refinery Ventures team, Tim Schigel, managing partner and host of their show Fast Frontiers, and Abby Fittis, their director of operations. And they've prepped for launch of their third season that they're rolling out very soon, as you'll hear in the show. And they've reflected on what it took to get that podcast off the ground, the challenges that they faced along the way, and how they've used process, seasons, and partners to create a recipe for success for their show that you are going to want to emulate. Listen in as Tim and Abby share their experience and unpack how you can take a page from their book to put your thought leadership on full display.
Hi, Abby Fittis, Director of Operations at Refinery Ventures in Cincinnati, Ohio, and our podcast is Fast Frontiers.
I'm Tim Schigel, Managing Partner of Refinery Ventures in Cincinnati.
That's good. Well, thank you both for being here. I'm just going to open up the show and just come clean that we actually recorded the first few minutes already, at least I thought we did, but I wasn't recording. So this is actually going to be the second time we start having this conversation. But luckily, see, it happens to all of us. Everybody who's listening either has a podcast or is thinking about doing a podcast, and sometimes you forget to hit record. So if you're lucky, like I was this morning, you only get a couple minutes in. So let's do this again, Tim and Abby. Let's talk about...
In the spirit of true confessions, one of our best interviews with a extremely successful entrepreneur who had a multi-billion-dollar exit. We got through the whole thing, and it was, I think, a Friday afternoon, and I looked and I no record. And I just felt sick to my stomach, like literally nauseous. And luckily, he was super, super nice. He understood, and we rescheduled, and we did, and it was fine. So amazing how that happens, right? I mean, it's true. So we have a checklist, just like you have to have a checklist and just say, okay, got to remember this, got to remember that, just like an airline pilot.
It's true. It's true. So there you go. If anyone listening has ever forgotten to hit record, it's happened to both of us on this show today, all three of us, both sides of this equation here. Let's talk about the show. Let's talk about Fast Frontiers. So what is it? Why does it exist? And tell us about the show.
Sure. So Fast Frontiers is finishing up season 2. And it is about how innovation is accelerating in unexpected places. And the brief origin story, and I'll let Abby, talk more about how we do it, but is as a venture capital firm, our main audience is entrepreneurs. And, there's an element of kind of getting our name out there a little bit, but that really wasn't the motivating factor. And, the truth was that we kind of came to it kicking and screaming. To some degree, because our main activity is investing in helping entrepreneurs grow companies. But I started getting a lot of feedback that, we get to talk to so many different interesting people, and that people could really benefit and learn. And so there's the mission was really more of an education mission than anything else, which is to share some of the stories that we've seen and bust some of the myths that are out there about raising money and venture capital and entrepreneurship outside of the traditional coastal hubs like Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
So what we saw was that there's interest in that topic globally, not just in the Midwest, which is pretty exciting. So we've gotten, great reviews for the podcast, and it's a great opportunity just to kind of share our network with other people, people we know, and like I said, take on some of the myths and kind of flip the script to help hopefully encourage entrepreneurs and give them more information to help them be successful.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, thought leadership, right? You're sharing what you learn. You're sharing what you know. You're sharing what other people know. You're pulling it all into one place and making it easily accessible to your audience of entrepreneurs that are not on the coast, like me.
Right.
Yeah. So that's
and we're so excited about doing this with you because we've been really impressed with what you've been doing at Casted, and it turns out we're even a customer. For full disclosure, and it's been very helpful. And I think there is a growing trend of businesses that are finding out that podcasts and interactive discussions like this are a really great way to tell stories and share. It's engaging. And, a lot of people I talk to say, they listen to us in the car or when they're working out in the morning, and which is my habit as well. I don't listen to my own podcast. I listen to yours or somebody else's. But I think it really is a great medium for that.
It is. It's true. And like you said, and I think a couple of reasons that I'm so excited to talk with you is because, I think people quite often, especially this audience, it's like, okay, well, marketers and marketing podcasts and SaaS, and there's a lot in that space, and that's true. But, venture capital, financial services, healthcare, like there's manufacturing, there's space for and a need for this medium and this channel and these kind of conversations that create these connections with your audience, regardless really of what industry you're in. If you have an audience and you have the ability to have conversations with people that are interesting to your audience and really be seen as the beacon, as the source of that data, and really kind of as a trusted guide and trusted leader for your audience as they're seeking information, because everyone's seeking information about something.
Right. And you mentioned the term thought leadership, and not to suggest in a way that we're the smartest or the brightest, but I think the good marketers understand that now more than ever, authenticity is key. Mm-hmm. And it's not about selling. It's about providing solutions or ideas and that thought leadership in a way to your audience that can be very helpful. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, that's good marketing, right? It's 100%. It's not like the traditional marketing. Hey, buy this. These are all the great benefits. It's having just authentic conversations with people and learning from each other.
Exactly. And then using that to fuel everything else, to start more conversations, right? So let's talk about kind of how it came about. You said you kind of got dragged kicking and screaming into it. What did that look like? What does that mean? How did you kind of snap the tape and say, this is what we're doing? And how'd you get started?
Well, it's kind of funny because if we're sharing the video, I'm sitting here in my studio, and I, musician, and any excuse to buy gear, I'm all over it. But the truth is that's always been sort of the alter ego. It's not been what I haven't used it at work, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And we had done a number of, we had tried writing, we were getting articles published, and for me, that wasn't necessarily natural. We also aren't really heavy on promoting ourselves. I'm completely off Facebook nowadays. I was very early in the social media, movement, but I kind of pulled back from that. So as we talked about content, some of our friends and advisors were suggesting that maybe we do a book, and that's a process and that takes some time. And I thought, well, as we were brainstorming that, we were talking about a number of topics, including things like these ecosystems, entrepreneurs in ecosystems like Indianapolis or Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. And from 2012 to 2016, I helped start and run Centrifuge and their fund of funds, which was backed by big companies like Procter & Gamble and Great American Insurance and Western Southern, Kroger, and others. So I learned a lot about sort of the ecosystem challenges that are out there. And so my mind goes, part of my mind goes there now, right? And what are the opportunities and limitations? And which is partly also why we started Refinery, which is focused on what I call early scale after the seed round. What we found was that there's outside of Silicon Valley, there aren't many entrepreneurs who've ever worked in a company that had hypergrowth, like 0 to 10 million and beyond, or 10 to 100, or 100 to a billion. And in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of them. There's a concentration of them. And that's usually where future founders are trained, right? They've worked in one of those companies and they take with them more experience than they understand. And we just don't have that in other areas. So we said we want to solve that problem by investing at this specific stage, because if we can help companies go from like product market fit to early scale, is what we call this stage. Yeah. If we can help them with that transition, raising money gets a lot easier. I often call it the first principle, which is capital follows growth. Turns out investors just like making money. They don't care where you are. And today, in the age of remote work and cloud computing and mobile, there are advantages to being outside of those kind of crowded, noisy hubs. And so there's a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs. So that's a gap we're trying to fill. And so there's a lot of different stories and myths that go along with that. And when you're talking ecosystem development, they think, oh, very long term. Oh, this is 20, 30 year thing, which is good. We should think long term. However, look at how old current unicorns are that go public. Yeah. They're like 7 years old. Yeah.
Yeah. The sweet spot is like 6 years, right?
Yeah. So I kind of had this notion of like the 7-year miracle, right? Like the next unicorn and leading company in your city is probably right under your nose. Right. And it's just a matter of getting through that early scale and helping create a market leader. Yeah. And so that's just like one of the stories that we started talking about with the book. And then what emerged was this concept of fast frontiers, meaning there's all sorts of frontiers, not just geographical frontiers. You know, it could be geographical, right? The Midwest or Dubai, as we've learned, or Australia. For sure. This season we had, many global interviews. But it's also, frontiers of health tech, frontiers of marketing, frontiers of you name it. Frontiers of leadership. So we just thought, wow, this is a really interesting topic. We don't really see anybody talking about it in this way. And the world is getting, and one final point on this, which is, the world is just moving faster, right? And technology, every company has to think of themselves as a technology company, right? If you look at the churn rate of public companies in the Fortune 500, I mean, if you're not on the bandwagon, you're going to be lost. And COVID helped accelerate the digital transformation of so many companies. Yep. So, but it can be dizzying, especially if you don't understand 100%. Technology. Yes. Right. It can be very confusing. These frontiers are moving faster. So you need a helpful guide and a way to interpret some of that to understand what's really going on so that you can create some clarity through the chaos and navigate it. And so that's the purpose for Fast Frontiers. And then we thought, I have these conversations all the time. What better way to do this than just record a podcast and then generate content from that point on?
Yes, exactly.
One thing I'll tee up for Abby here first, though, that she knows is my one rule was I can't spend a lot of time on this. Yeah. Like, meaning I'm helping entrepreneurs, like we're investing. We have to have a process and a mechanism that this can be something we do and we're able to crank out in a production sort of way without it being like creating a custom tailored suit every time. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are nervous about that. I mean, because there's you, for every you, there's a marketing director, there's a head of product, there's a, CMO, there's a founder that is like, okay, I get it. But this cannot be my life because I'm building a business, I'm building a product, I'm leading a team, I'm saving lives. I can't spend a lot of time on this. So how have you solved for that? What does your process look like?
I think when you're approaching any project, you kind of think of like, what are the barriers to entry? What are the ways in which I have to jump over something or things that I have to tackle in order to be successful at this? And Tim set it up perfectly is, our barrier to entry sometimes is time. Yeah. And then sometimes it's resources or finances. And so you kind of had to go through, like, if we want to do a podcast, how do we make it so those barriers to entry are easy to overcome? And so the way I convinced Tim to do it was, if you record all of the interviews, I will do everything else. Like, we need your storytelling. We need your connections to this to bring it to life. And I promise you, that's the only part you have to do.
Yeah.
And I think I've kept pretty close to it.
I'm going to say, how's that working?
Yeah, pretty
She
close.
is the task manager.
It's actually an intervention. How's
Abby,
that working?
Yeah, she stays on top of it. And if it wasn't for Abby doing that, it might languish. But that is also related to kind of one of the requirements and why I dragged my feet for a little bit, because I said if we start it, we have to continue it.
Yeah.
Right. It can't start and stop. So this has to be something that we get good at over time, but that we continue.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
No, and I think we had come up with this idea or tossed around the idea of a podcast back in 2019. And looking at my notes from, when we were going to really get started on the podcast was during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Things shut down. It's not that work got less busy. Work just shifted. People weren't traveling. You weren't having to get ready to do all of these different conferences and other things. So it allowed for a little quiet to kind of wrap our heads around it and say, can we do this? Do we want to do it? And then how do we do it?
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you answer those questions? You're like doing this for me.
Yeah.
How are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I love podcasts. I'm just like a listener to all podcasts. Never thought I would be working on one. Kind of a dream. Like, wow, I get to put out something that people can go on Apple Podcasts and hit play on their drive like I do. Mm-hmm. So that has been the coolest thing, is to really then see how it gets made. And I think it takes someone that maybe really enjoys process and is okay with that, and is really okay with figuring out how is then the best way to do that process. Mm-hmm. And I learned that the hard way, for sure. Season 1 was way harder than season 2.
Yeah.
Way harder, because it was the first time I'm doing anything. Yeah. And I think the best suggestion we give anyone is to surround yourself with people that know how to do this better than you do.
Mm-hmm. Always, for all things. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we have experts. So I don't have the audio technology background to know how to slice and edit a podcast and make it sound really good. I also don't have all of the marketing background to say, what do we do with this now that we have it? Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was finding and learning from 2 partners in that aspect, which was Astronomic Audio, who does all of our audio engineering. They're in Canada. And then Content Callout really helps us then also in Canada with taking that content. We have the transcriptions of all of these great interviews. How do we use it to our advantage? And so we're able to write articles about just summaries of the episodes, which is great to get it not only in audio, but also in text. And then we can also, kind of slice and dice that into different social media posts, audiograms, and those became that much easier when in season 2, we added Casted into the mix. I think that really also helped in making it more my own. Mm-hmm. Casted really, quite frankly, allows you to have more control over the whole process.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for that. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention Content Callout, because they're, thanks to you all, because you introduced them to us, and they're a partner of ours now. And so now everyone who's listening can also work with both of us. And it's nice to have that resource, because you have somebody like Content Callout who can help with strategy and execution, and then Casted that can help be the platform to make it happen, and hopefully lift some of the burden for you all as you are, somebody like Tim's having great conversations, and somebody like you, Abby, is bringing it all to life. So yeah, it works. What advice do both of you have for someone else who's listening and thinking, how do we do this? Thought leadership is important. We're having all these great conversations. I get it. What advice do you have?
I think one of the first questions was, what's the format? Right? Is it just us talking? Is it interview? Is it panels? Just what is it? And we decided the easiest thing was and best thing was interviews. Just, basically me interviewing entrepreneurs and investors and people, the ecosystem leaders, researchers, whoever. So I think one was that, right? What's the right format? Well, actually before that's even audience, right? But that for us, that was obvious. It was the entrepreneurs. Yeah. But for some, they may have to think about that. Who is the audience? What's the right format? What is the frequency? And for me, some of the podcasts I enjoy the most are actually fairly frequent, at least once a week or more, because I go back. Because if you don't go back to something, you kind of forget about it.
Yep.
Right. So you want it to be recent. And And actually, I think it was your idea of packaging it up in seasons.
I was just going to say, and you're doing seasons, which is one of the things I always recommend.
Doing seasons, so that was a huge help actually to think about it. So we typically do 12 or 15 episodes in a season.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps us a lot in terms of who do we want to talk to? How do we go out and ask people, hey, can we have you on the podcast? Would you like to be on the podcast? And it was a big step in terms of helping us just organize the work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Abby?
I could not live without seasons. Again, for us, it doesn't have a specific theme that we maybe thought it would, because sometimes the seasons kind of come together close to the end.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like, how do you make this happen? It's the recency. Like, you have to have ideas right in front of you of what do I need to do today or in the next week to get these things done. But I have had a 1 year, 2 year calendar of when the seasons would be on my desktop always. Yeah. So that I know I can plan kind of our lives around it. I can plan when, hey, Tim, this is when we're going to need to invite a bunch of people and we're going to have to spend some time. That's another place that I use his time and energy is we have to go invite people to do this. So we have to have a couple weeks where we're doing that, a couple weeks where we're recording, and then a couple weeks where I'm going to sprinkle you in for some intros and outros work.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of it is just reading and approving articles and, helping push things out when they go live.
I think that's
moving by those seasons. Sorry.
I was just going to say that's so important. And I've had a few conversations like this where there's somebody who's managing it like you, Abby, and there's somebody who's hosting it like you, Tim. And it's like, okay, how are we going to do this? It's like seasons makes it possible, because otherwise you get into this feeling where it's going to be always, 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 forever and ever and ever. How am I always going to be doing interviews all the time? And it's like, nope, a couple times a year, we're going to kind of block you off for like a week.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to monopolize your time for like a week or something. It's different for every company, different for every show, but it makes it attainable, and it helps you get your arms around it. Right.
I think one of the other first things was a concern or reticence that, hey, can I get people to show up? Can I get people to want to be interviewed? And that is probably easier than you think, right? People love telling their stories.
Yeah.
Your point of the podcast is to make sure that they look good and smart, and so it's a good thing, and people are receptive to it. We'll see. Maybe there comes a point when people are doing too many podcasts and they don't. But our experience has been that people love to participate and jump at it, and so that's been good.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we did, or Abby did early on, that also helped was she listened in on every one of the interviews and took notes. Maybe Abby, you could talk about that, but that was a big help, I think.
Yeah, I think just being able to, you're going to do some prep beforehand, right? You need to tell your guests a little bit of an idea of these are some of the things we want to talk about, because some of the guests Tim has known for years and years, and they could dive in and talk about anything. Yeah. But we may not get to the point on something in, 45-minute recording. So, you already, prep them a little bit. And so I can listen in and make sure that we are kind of hitting that. But also, Tim's a really good interviewer, and it gets easier as you keep doing it, I think, right? Like your first couple, you're like, did I do it right? Or like, did I transition well? And so I can kind of send some of those behind the scenes notes, like this is going great, or like, make sure we can land the plane towards this question. Yeah. And then I can also take notes of like, just a reminder that person's internet went out 20 minutes in, and then we had to re-get back on. Yeah. So just, it's helpful to know some of these little quirks that happen in any recording. Or if someone said something really cool and I can see Tim's reaction to it, it's like, I got to make sure that I send that to content call out, or I remember to look for that when I'm doing the editing, that was really an aha moment.
And I think too, that might actually, I'm guessing, save you time later, because otherwise you'd have to go back and listen to it later anyway. So again, of course, depending on how processes work and how you're doing things. So just kind of being in on it in real time kind of saves everybody time. So as we wrap things up, what's one thing that you've both learned that you kind of wish you knew going into it, that you can kind of share with others so other people can learn that lesson faster?
I think for me, this was one of the first times in a while where my work was my work was impacting what everyone else's workflow was. So when you have all these other partners that are helping you make this possible, you have to give them a final product for them to do something with in order to really amplify that episode, right? So just making sure that you're scheduling time to get all these things done was really important for me, and that everyone understood what the workflow process was going to be like for each season. So I have onboarding calls before each season with the audio engineers, with content call out to say, this is when we think we're going to have each of the guests roll out per season. This is when I'm going to get you the text edits. This is when you're going to get me back the audio edits. And this is when we're going to give you the article back, so that all of this can align and go out the day that we've said it's going to on all the streaming platforms. So making sure everyone's on the same page, just like in any project, is really important.
Yeah, I think, I know people that have big audiences and they don't do as much production as we do, and others that do or do more. And so I think, that just reminds you that the content's the most important thing, right? So when we see what people react to, it's the content. Our theory was we wanted to make sure that it was well produced. It was professional. It wasn't sloppy. Yep. The thing I would say that I'm learning is to actually schedule the recordings on certain days of the month, like just one whole day or 2 whole days. I know some people that have some very popular podcasts, and they'll say they'll do 8 recordings in a day.
That's a lot.
Which I think is a lot.
5. I was like, never again. This is never happening again.
Exactly. Yeah. Because if you're doing a good job and truly listening, and on Zoom, it takes energy, right? And you need to think, you need to take some notes, you need to make sure you're guiding the discussion in the right way. So, but on the other hand, as it relates to scheduling and your own mind space, instead of having interviews like interspersed throughout the week, that also gets kind of rough, right? So, and for scheduling the guests, it's easier when you say, look, here are the dates we have in the next 2 or 3 months when we're doing production.
Yep.
Right. So they appreciate it. It helps you, contain your time. But I think probably 4 is I think we set our limit.
Yeah. 4's the limit. 3 is more comfortable, but 4 is definitely the max.
That sounds right.
So, but grouping them together, I think, is kind of the biggest learning that we've gone through as process improvement.
It's a good recommendation. Great. Well, okay. So tell us, you're wrapping up season 2. When are you hoping for season 3? When can everybody who's listening join in on that?
Season 3 will start at the end of April and will lead us right into the summer season before we take a break. So if you're looking for that, nice spring, early summer inspiration, season 3 is coming then for that.
I love it. Fast Frontiers. You guys are doing really cool conversations. As somebody who's a member of your audience, keep it coming, because it's educational, it's entertaining, and you're doing a great job. So thanks for being here today. Thanks for sharing behind the scenes what you all have learned and helping our audience learn along with you. That's our show. Thanks so much for listening. And for more from today's guest and some pretty amazing content that they've inspired, visit casted.us and be sure to subscribe to our newsletter to get the latest on all things amplified marketing, B2B podcasting, and a lot more.